Hey guys, welcome back to more Karen stories. In this video, a racist Karen spends months harassing someone she thinks is just some random guy in her neighborhood. Little does she know, he is actually her landlord and owns half the properties in town. Let's dive right into today's stories. And the first one is titled, When a Racist Caller Demanded to be Transferred to an American Employee. So I got away with this for about a month before I finally had it, answering phone calls from rude and/or idiotic people all day. Then I quit. I only did this about a dozen or so times, but it was so damn funny to my coworker and I each time, and worth it since I was quitting anyways. When I got a caller who made racist comments about overseas employees and demanded to be transferred to an American one, I happily did so. Even though I was also an American employee, I was just complying maliciously. Now, this was only possible because a coworker on my same team usually sat in a cubicle neighboring mine, and I could transfer a customer to him when I knew his line was open. I asked him before I started doing this if he would be on board with the idea, and he was. This coworker, though, is of Indian descent from immigrant parents, but he was born here in the US and therefore a citizen. He usually spoke excellent English and was more articulate than most of the people calling in, but he could really lay on a very heavy Indian accent if he wanted to. So when I transferred one of these special customers to him, I would also give him a heads up using our intranet chat system. When he would answer the call with his heavy Indian accent, the caller either hung up right away or shouted some more colorful language at him before hanging up. I still cannot figure out why these people were not satisfied getting exactly what they asked for. And yeah guys, that's what I would call textbook malicious compliance, and if you enjoy these malicious compliance stories, then please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post a comment, because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much. The next one is titled, Racist Renter Karen has extreme meltdown when she realizes I own half the neighborhood. So many years ago, my grandfather decided to invest in some properties in France. Back then, the prices were very cheap, and since then the housing market has skyrocketed, as I'm sure you know. My grandpa was quite the businessman and had the foresight to buy up most of the available real estate in this particular village over the course of several years, essentially becoming the town's primary landowner. Furthermore, the neighborhood itself has vast amounts of money pumped into it from the government. It is and will always be a small rural village. But it has become cleaner and has this quaint idyllic vibe that many people would dream of living in. Fast forward a while and my father inherits these properties upon the death of my grandpa. My father is still alive, but decided that owning these properties was too much stress on him and he would rather live a retired life, and so passed them down to me. So there I was, suddenly owning half a village of properties, all of which were being rented to people in the area. For years, everything had been managed through a local property management agency that handled all tenant communications under their business name, so most tenants had never dealt with me directly. However, around the time I inherited these properties, one of the tenants moved out. This opening, I decided, would be filled by me. I wanted a change in my life, a new start and a new place, and what better place than this peaceful village in France. I moved around 2 years ago, from America that is, and remained here to this day, but that isn't to say that there haven't been challenges. Going back to when I first moved in, I remember most of the neighborhood being friendly, happy to see a new face in their community. I prefer a low-key lifestyle, and so I didn't let anybody know at first that I owned half of the properties here. I didn't want people looking at me as the classic landlord here to make them miserable. Even though I wasn't announcing who I was, at least at first, I did want to get to know all of my tenants. This was easy as the community was so welcoming and warming that I ended up attending some sort of gathering at each of the homes I rent out. Everyone is so lovely, inviting me into their homes and welcoming me into the community. Well, almost everyone. Her name was Karen. She lives in a small quaint house up on one of the hills surrounding the town, another house that I own and rent to her. Of course, for most of this story, she does not realize that I'm the one renting to her. She had been dealing with the property management company under their business alias for years and had never had reason to know the actual owner's identity. Anyway, Karen is known to be secluded, as the other neighbors have told me. She keeps to herself unless she needs to come into town for something, and when she does, she leaves an impression. She has been known to harass the vendors at markets, begging for discounts or free produce. She stalks buskers and tries to get them to pack up their equipment and leave, and she especially likes to find out where everyone is gathering and somehow putting a stop to it. I asked a neighbor why they didn't just invite her to the gatherings to be the bigger person, but I've been told they have tried on several occasions already. She just won't come. Months after I moved in and a few people knew about my occupation, I decided to just go and introduce myself as her landlord. I clearly was not gonna meet her any other way. I had recently taken over direct management of the properties from the agency to save costs and have more personal control. The other reason that I decided to properly introduce myself was because she was behind on rent. The property management company had informed me before I took over that she had been consistently late and now she was several months behind. I was not desperate for the rent, I made enough money and didn't want to be too strict, however, maybe knowing the landlord was around would urge her to pay or at least inform me what the issue was. If there was ever a real problem with one of my tenants, I hope I'll be able to help. I was also aware that I would need to begin formal legal procedures soon if the situation did not improve, as French tenant law requires proper documentation and processes. So over I go, carrying a small tray of muffins that the local bakery says she often buys. I knocked on the door several times, standing there for the good part of 5 minutes before she eventually calls and says, "Geez, give me a minute," through the door. I felt bad after that, maybe I'd been slightly pushy. "What?" she yelled as she swung open the doors. I stumbled slightly, coughing to regain my composure, still wanting to appear at least slightly professional here. "Well, I just wanted to introduce myself. I moved to the area a few months ago. I'm Alfie, I was gonna continue and say I was her landlord, but she cut me off with a laugh. She kept laughing for a while. It was clearly a fake laugh. "You live here? No, we don't have your kind here." I was taken aback, instantly knowing she was on about my ethnicity. I've had to deal with racism all my life, but hadn't experienced anything in this new town, and I was really enjoying the peace so far. "Sorry?" I asked, and then tried to again explain who I was, but once again she cut me off with a hand to the face. She laughed again and then became serious. She explained that my kind would not last well around here and that I should probably leave before the rest of the neighborhood finds out I live here. I informed her that they certainly already know, more to the point have been very welcoming and friendly. I told her that nobody had any issues with me. She called me a liar and slammed the door in my face, leaving me shocked. "I will take these," I remember her saying as she opened the door a final time, snatching the muffins out of my hands. And guys, I guess that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I walked back down the hill confused and annoyed. What a rude interaction. Part of me was glad that I didn't get the chance to explain I was her landlord. Maybe her true colors wouldn't have come out. I told a few of my neighbors about what happened. They were sympathetic and outraged at her behavior, but not shocked. They informed me that she was often this nasty and derogatory for no reason at all. After being cheered up, I moved on with my day. I saw nothing of Karen until a week later when I was sitting on a bench at one of the nearby parks. You again," she scoffed. "Move along." I looked at her in bewilderment. Did she want to get me off the bench? I was not planning on doing that. "We don't want homeless people here." She rolled her eyes. So now she thought I was homeless. I replied that I just moved in down the road, yet she still scolded me for being homeless once more, this time calling me a liar as well. She carried on walking, calling me names as she passed under her breath and kicking over my drink, which I had placed on the floor. Wow, what a charming woman. For the record, she still had not paid the past few months' rent, and given her behavior, I had long since lost any sympathy. This sympathy dwindled even further when I confided in one of my closer friends in the area about her lack of rent payments. He informed me that Karen was known to be wealthy, that she and her family owned countless companies. Now, the rent really didn't make any sense. I emailed her from the rental management account where my personal name and image was not present, still using the business alias the management company had established. I constructed a professional email asking for reasons behind their lack of rent payments. A few hours later, I got a reply, carefully crafted. She claimed that her bank was having some troubles, that her payments had been sent but just not cleared. I called the bank, who confirmed that this was not true. While I was planning on how I would approach the topic and considering my legal options, Karen kept on harassing me. She came into town much more frequently, seemingly just to seek me out and call me all sorts of names. Her racist remarks had skyrocketed, becoming increasingly insulting and rude. One time she showed up to my friend's house for their small party/gathering. Everyone was shocked as Karen had never bothered to show up to anything before. She walked in, cornered me, and began shouting in my face. She called me slurs, homeless, a waste of space, all sorts. Eventually, another neighbor all but dragged her out by the hair. "Hey, get off me!" she yelled as she was wrestled to the door and thrown out. I left shortly after that. It was a horrible experience. Things got only worse when she began calling the police on me. She would call them all the time for no reason whatsoever. "What are you doing?" she yelled, running up to me at the market. "Thief!" she screamed and called the police. Nobody around her moved, used to her behavior by now. At first the police took her call seriously, questioning me properly, but before long they grew wary and arrived with skepticism. By this point, I'd also begun documenting all of her harassment and racist behavior, as I was considering filing a formal complaint with the authorities. "He's trespassing," was her favorite complaint. I obviously wasn't. Another few weeks passed and I still hadn't done anything formal about her rent situation, though I had been consulting with a local bailiff about the proper legal procedures here. I don't like confrontation, and that's the main reason I was holding this off. My peers were confused as to why I was not handling it more decisively. I had learned that since Karen was on a month-to-month lease agreement rather than a long-term contract, the eviction process could be somewhat faster but still required proper legal documentation. Eventually, I decided on a plan, and it came into play the next time she called the police on me. Karen ran over to me in the park where I was peacefully sitting. 2 officers ran behind her looking bewildered. "Where's the attack?" one of them asked, panting from the run. When the officers saw me, they sighed, scolding Karen for the false alarm again. They had grown quite tired of her constant calls about me. Then I seized the moment to address the real issues. I explained to the officers that this woman had been harassing me for weeks with racist slurs and false police reports, and that I'd been documenting everything. I also mentioned that there was an ongoing civil matter regarding unpaid rent, as I was actually her landlord. "I am your landlord, Karen." And by the way, guys, I want that quote in the next Star Wars movie. Anyway, I stated after she had started to protest about my so-called lies. She was silent, her face going pale before she continued her rant, calling me a liar and claiming I was just trying to get a rise out of her. She called me more names, throwing in a few slurs just to add salt to the wound. After hearing the verbal abuse directly, which I pointed out was exactly the pattern of harassment I'd been documenting, the officers decided to detain her for disturbing the peace and public harassment. The racist language would be a part of a formal complaint I planned to file, which would carry additional weight in any legal proceedings. She was of course not happy about this, continuing to kick up a fuss. As she was being placed in the police car, I informed her that I owned half the properties in the village, annoying her even further. To top it all off, I handed her a formal notice which I'd prepared with the bailiff, an official document beginning the eviction process for non-payment of rent and violation of the lease terms. She opened it while in custody, yelling as the car pulled away. She was detained for a few days for the harassment and disturbing the peace charges. During this time, I filed the formal racism complaint with the authorities and continued with the legal eviction proceedings through proper channels. The combination of the documented harassment, racist behavior, and unpaid rent made for a strong case. Once she was released, she was facing both the eviction process and the pending racism complaint. Rather than fight the legal proceedings, she quickly cleared out of her house and drove off, never to be seen again, clearly too embarrassed to stick around for longer and likely wanting to avoid the formal hearings. The community has been wonderful during all of this. Of course, I did not have to pay back Karen's security deposit due to the unpaid rent and damages, and her contract required her to pay the outstanding balance. Through the legal process and working with the bailiff, we were able to recover most of the unpaid rent. Since all of this drama, my life has been now peaceful, and I'm happy to announce that a lovely family has moved into Karen's old home. They've been wonderful additions to the community. And the next one is an interesting story from r/petty revenge/r/malicious compliance. It is titled Keep an eye on the Indian guy because you're a racist? Okay then, enjoy your Indian grandchildren. When I lost my part-time job due to the pandemic, a good friend, let's call her Kate, helped me get hired at the after-school learning center her dad owns. She did warn me though that her dad was unapologetically racist. I will call her dad Owner. Anyway, Owner and manager loved me as an employee. At the 2020 Christmas party hosted at Owner's house, I got offered the role of assistant manager. We chatted for a while after, and Owner and I briefly bonded over our dislike of corrupt establishment politicians. I just prefer progressives, but I didn't disclose that part. I think he came out of that conversation with the incorrect assumption that I shared his politics and social views, and his racist tendencies immediately got less subtle. In January, manager hired a new employee to fill in for the role that I left. The new guy was a very dark-skinned Indian man around my and Kate's age, 24 at the time. On this guy's first day, Owner was visiting. He has another job, so he only comes in on Mondays. Right before students start arriving, Owner pulls me aside and asks me to keep an eye on the new employee. I don't remember the exact wording that followed, this is over a year ago, but basically, without saying anything directly, Owner implies that he suspected new employee would steal something or do something to the kids. Despite not saying the actual words, his intentions were clear, and it was the most overt racism he had displayed so far. But rather than say something in the heat of the moment, I decided to just maliciously comply. So I kept an eye on new employee ever since, watching him to make sure he succeeds. I made sure he had all the support he needed, I shielded him from Owner's racism as much as I could, I invited him to grab drinks after work a few times, and we ended up becoming really good friends. And then last month, when I told Owner I had to leave at the end of this year, I knew no one else was interested in my position as assistant director, so I got most of the staff to endorse him as my replacement. Well, I am now training him to take over for me. He is doing so well today that I was able to just sit around and write this post. However, my favorite part in all of this is that at last year's Christmas party, I introduced new employee to Kate. They clicked like no other couple I've ever seen and have now been dating for almost a year. New employee proposed to Kate at Thanksgiving and she said yes. And I know they are definitely trying for kids real soon. Owner knows they are engaged, but he didn't come in on Monday like he usually does, and we haven't heard from him, so I don't know how he is taking it. Anyway, cannot wait for this year's Christmas party. And the last one is an awesome story from r/petty revenge. It is titled, "Steal from me while a guest in my home? Enjoy the fallout." So this happened many years ago. Back then I was young, married and pregnant, the perfect trifecta for social ostracization. Most people felt that I had married up as my husband came from money and had a good job, which meant that unlike most young married people, I had a beautiful home and nice things. Just about everyone my age was either in college or still in high school. Most of the people I knew who were married and pregnant were much older than me. I was having a hard time. Naively, I initially tried to make and maintain friendships with people my age or a little younger. This was a problem for many reasons, not the least of which being that when you are young, lonely, and have nice things that most other young people don't have, you can draw the wrong kind of friends. I developed a friendship with a girl who was finishing up her senior year in high school. We had gone to the same school and she was a freshman when I was a junior. We had some friends in common. She started coming over to my house and hanging out. One evening, she asked if she could bring a friend over to the house with her for dinner. I said, sure. At one point that evening, my friend's guest asked to use the restroom. My husband and I explained where it was, but did not escort her, trusting that she would find it herself. She walked around the corner, ostensibly in the direction of said bathroom, and came back shortly after. The night ended with no clue on my husband's or my part that things were about to get crazy. About a week later, I could not find a pair of earrings I wore on my wedding day. My husband bought me a pearl and diamond necklace and earring set as a wedding gift. We tore the house apart looking for them, but to no avail. My husband said I must have set them down somewhere and forgotten, but we would eventually find them. I was anxious about it, but I knew the last place I'd had them was at home. We also had not done any major deep cleaning or vacuuming, so I knew they had to be around somewhere. A few weeks went by, and I suddenly noticed one of our checking accounts that we set up as a business account for my husband when he was contemplating starting a side hustle was massively in the negative to the tune of almost $1,000. Most of it was overdraft fees. Because we did not keep much of a balance in that account, I immediately called my husband and told him that we had a large negative balance in that specific account. Neither of us had been using the debit card for that account mistakenly, so we began reviewing the charges. All the charges were for stores at the same local mall and were for places where teenage girls would typically shop. There were dozens of small to medium purchases, each followed by a $25 overdraft fee once they spent the initial balance we kept in the account to avoid penalties. This all added up to about $1,000 in total theft. We had not had many people over, and we specifically kept that debit card in our master bedroom. So it was pretty easy to figure out what had happened here and just who was responsible. It also was not that much of a hop, skip and a jump to also figure out where my earrings went. Piss does not even begin to describe my mental state. I'd been incredibly generous with this friend. I had welcomed her into my home, I had cooked for her and her friend, I called every store in the mall and began asking if they had security cameras. Most did not, but one store had just recently installed security cameras due to issues with shoplifting. They let me know that while they had recorded footage from the day in question, they couldn't hand it over to me but would be happy to provide it to the police if I filed a report. I then contacted my bank, I asked them what the procedure was for declaring charges fraudulent and reversing them. They indicated that an investigation would need to take place and that I had a limited amount of time to make that decision before I permanently assumed responsibility for those charges. They also made it clear that the overdraft fees would not be reversed unless I declared the charges were fraudulent. So I did more digging. $2,000 in theft was the cutoff for felony charges. My earrings were worth approximately $800. We had about $1,000 worth of charges, plus the overdraft fees in the checking account. So I contacted my friend and let her know the horrible news that someone we had over at the house had stolen from me. I explained to her that my pearl earrings from my wedding had gone missing and that someone had stolen a debit card we kept upstairs in my master bedroom before running up charges at the mall. She seemed very sympathetic and said that was just terrible. I then told her a very nice little white lie that we were gonna pursue felony charges since between the earrings, the charges at all these stores and the many overdraft fees, more than $2,000 worth of theft had occurred. She was quick to chime in with the info that she was pretty sure there would be no way to prove who had used my debit card, as the stores at the mall I had mentioned didn't have security cameras. Bingo, thanks for double confirming what I already knew. That is when I helpfully supplied the info that one of the stores had just recently installed security cameras and that they were preparing to hand it over to the police once I filed a report. She got extremely quiet after that and said that she had to go. Not so surprisingly, she called me back shortly after and asked if she could come over. She showed up within 30 minutes not only with my pearl earrings and debit card, but also a small diamond ring I inherited from my great aunt and I had no clue was missing. I never wore it and primarily held onto it for sentimental reasons. She had a very well-rehearsed little explanation, saying she had not stolen anything from me. Her friend snuck up my stairs into my bedroom and stole some of my jewelry and my debit card under the pretense of using my bathroom. When I pointed out that clearly she knew about the theft and yet sat and did nothing, she began crying, arguing that she was in a difficult spot and didn't want to betray her friend. Clearly, I did not qualify as a friend. She confessed that there were multiple others involved in the shopping spree at the mall, including her. She seemed to be quite content to participate in racking up charges on my checking account along with her friend, despite claiming she had not stolen from me. I was honestly devastated by the near loss of sentimental pieces of jewelry, which I felt incredibly fortunate to have back. This made it easy for me to shut down her attempts at emotional manipulation. I made it clear in no uncertain terms that as far as I was concerned, whatever happened next was up to them, and I had no problem seeing them all charged with felony robbery. 2 of the 4 involved were 17, but the others were 18, so felony charges could have been a pretty big deal. So then I demanded all the names and the parents' contact info and made it clear that if I did not get it, I was gonna go to the police. I called the parents and informed them of what their little angels had done. I also informed the parents that I would provide their children with the opportunity to repay the full balance of what they charged on my checking account and the overdraft fees. I made it clear that this was a time-sensitive offer that expired within about a week of buffer time in terms of the deadline to file fraud with my bank in case they failed to follow through. Needless to say, the parents were horrified by the behavior and extremely grateful for my offer. It was quite satisfying to know that the 4 of them had to get jobs and work long hours over the next few weeks in order to pay me back. At one point, my former friend tried to question me about the amount they owed, claiming it seemed like way more than what they spent and it was not fair. I took great pleasure in explaining how they racked up overdraft fees that the bank refused to reverse unless I filed fraud claims. Their little shopping spree had cost them about 3 to 4 times what it would have if they just used their own money. My former friend also tried to ask for more time and insisted it was too hard to pay me back in such a short period of time. I took great pleasure in asking her point blank why should I trust them or take any risk on given their recent actions. That shut her up pretty quickly. Ultimately, I received all my jewelry back and was repaid for all the charges and overdraft fees. I never spoke to any of them again. And yeah guys, thank you for watching. Please don't forget to check out my endless playlist on the left and I will see you again tomorrow.